Black Friday has started on Boosty. Up to 60% discount on subscription levels. Hurry up to buy at such a great price. Link in the description. Enjoy watching, everyone. Description: Naruto dies in battle with Kaguya and Rikudo sends him to another world. Chapter 4. I woke up early the next day. It wasn't even 6 yet. I couldn't fall asleep again, so I had to get up, do my usual stretching and go to the shower. Standing under the hot streams of water, I decided to ask a question that had been interesting me for a long time. Kurama, what's going on with my chakra? Biju? When can I use it? And that's why you can't sleep, he grumbled. Your body is not ready for it yet. In the worst case, you will be able to release one tail, but it will definitely not make you feel good. You will definitely end up in the hospital for a couple of weeks. I am working on your SCS. I think that by the time you graduate from the academy, you will be able to calmly release 5 tails without losing your mind. Forget about the cloak for now, you still have a long way to go. Of course it's a pity, but okay, we will work with what we have. Thank you for helping, little fox. What did you just call me? He was immediately indignant. Well, come down here. It seems like someone hasn't been punched in the face for a long time. You know, for some reason it seems to me that coming down to you now is not the best idea. I am doing quite well here, I grinned. So you help people, spend your energy on developing your body, and in response they only laugh at you. If I get offended, I'll follow Shikaku's example and also stretch a bit in the village. What would you, the great Kyubi no Yoko, follow the example of a raccoon? That was a pretty good joke you made. I laughed. Yeah, you're right about that. I'm more like Seiji PC, than follow the example of this stupid raccoon. He shuddered at this. I could feel it even from here. You know, PC sounds like a good idea. I would like to see it. I will have to think about the implementation. I thought. If suddenly you do this somehow, then you will never get my power again, I warned you. He said threateningly. Okay, live this time. Coming out of the shower, I quickly cooked myself an omelette, had breakfast and went to the training ground. Today I have a training session with Kakashi, so I decided to save my chakra for it, and now I will just do physical exercises and practice Tai. I have no problems with throwing. I completely regained my skill. After 4 hours, I was completely exhausted and, sitting down under a tree, fell asleep right on the training ground. When I woke up, at first I did not understand where I was. Having come to my senses, I realized that, judging by the position of the sun, I had slept for several hours and I would soon need to be at the 7th training ground. However, I still needed to eat, so I would most likely be late. I did not feel any remorse about this. It was Kakashi, on the contrary, who saw a good reason for a joke. Having quickly eaten at some cafe, I went to the necessary training ground. I arrived there at about 3:30 and all 4 were already there. Kakashi was the first to notice me and immediately said, "You're late." Sorry, a black cat ran across my path. I'm sure you will understand me, Kakashi-san. All 4 of them simultaneously twitched an eye. Apparently, he also often wanders along the roads of life here and managed to drive the whole team crazy with this. Kakashi was the first to come to his senses and smiled with his eye. How does he do it? I've been trying to repeat this all my life, but I have never managed to do anything even close to this. I only scared the children then. Soon the others came to their senses and of course my dear brother could not remain silent. What are you doing here, demon? No one is waiting for you here. Get out of here before I beat you. Kakashi-san, how could you deceive me? I feigned insult. I thought that we had an agreement yesterday, but it turns out that no one is waiting for me here. It is not nice to deceive. Kakashi sighed heavily and began to explain to his brother. Seiji, I invited him here. Do not pay attention to him. You have your own task, he will have his. And now run, march, run through the trees. All 3 hung their heads and went to the edge of the training ground. He looked at them for a while and then turned to me. So Naruto-kun, you have an affinity with lightning. Of course, I believe you, but it is still better to check. Take this piece of paper. I think you know what needs to be done. I took the paper between my fingers and fed chakra into it. It successfully compressed. Kakashi nodded in satisfaction and continued. Now that I am sure of your predisposition, we can begin training. So, in order to give the chakra the nature of lightning, you need to make it vibrate very strongly. Something like this, he said, and, taking an ordinary tree leaf, crushed it with chakra. The lightning element is the most unstable, so you need to have good control so that it does not hit you. This is one of the most common mistakes when mastering lightning. I myself was hit a few times while trying to create a chidori. Let me show you again how to compress a leaf, and then you try to do it yourself. I carefully watched his actions, trying to understand how exactly to make the chakra vibrate. After the second demonstration, I began to try to do it myself. Kakashi, making sure that I was busy, headed to his team, who were still trying to learn how to walk on trees. I wonder if Seiji has never trained before? This is one of the initial exercises for control. How can you not master it at such an age? Although, remembering my past life, I realize that it is not for me to say this. I myself learned this only at 12 in the land of waves. But I still wonder why Minato, or at least Kushina, did not train him in childhood. Okay, now it should not worry me. My goal is to compress this sheet. After an hour and a half of attempts, I finally succeeded, and I approached Kakashi with a satisfied face. Kakashi-sensei, I did it. Really? He looked surprised. Show me. I picked up the sheet of paper I had previously taken and, giving the chakra the nature of lightning, compressed it. Not bad, he was forced to admit. Now you need to increase your control over the element. I do not know how much time you will need for this, but I do not think that you will be able to raise it to a sufficient level today. Come here at the same time when you manage to crumple 5 sheets of paper at once. Hi, Kakashi-sensei. He just snorted at this address and turned away, looking at his students. One of whom, by the way, was just coming here. What does he want from me again? I rolled my eyes and turned around, getting ready to leave. But of course, do you think that if you can crumple a leaf, then you are already the coolest? I bet you can't climb a tree? Well, he's burying himself. Well, okay, such an opportunity can't be missed. How I'm tired of you, I sighed heavily. You know, I have a better idea. You are still my brother, unfortunately. I mentally said an older brother should play with the younger ones. So I suggest you play tag. If you can't touch me for, say, 10 minutes, then you will no longer constantly pick on me. Come up with your own condition that I will have to fulfill if I lose. He thought for a moment and replied, I agree. If I can touch you, you will fail the genin exam and will never be a shinobi. Apparently, he decided to scare me so that I would refuse. Well, let's play along with him. Okay, I said, making a scared face. Great. Kakashi-sensei, you can watch our game, he asked, grinning. Oh, well, there's nothing to do anyway. Are you ready? He asked. Ready, we said at the same time. Then let's start, Kakashi commanded. He immediately rushed to me. I, in turn, ran towards a small lake located on the training ground. He was not inferior to me in speed, he was even a little faster, although it would be strange if he was slower, considering the difference of 5 years. However, I managed to run to the lake, and stepping on its surface, reached its center. Seiji stared at me in surprise, but soon came to his senses and shouted angrily. Come here! I pretended to think about it, but smiled and shook my head, saying, I think I'll refuse, I'm fine here. This infuriated him, and he tried to repeat my trick with walking on water. But he didn't take into account that he doesn't even walk very confidently on trees, and naturally fell into the water without taking a step. Having become even more enraged and, it seems, even growling, he swam towards me. I just started running away from him across the lake. When the time was almost up, he got tired of swimming after me, and he came out onto the shore, looking angrily at me. Brother, you need to dry off, otherwise you might get sick. I couldn't help but mock him one last time and, thanking the gods for the second time for learning this technique, folded the seals. Futon, great gust. A powerful wave of wind hit Seiji and carried him across the entire clearing. You see, my dear brother, now you're dry and won't get sick. You don't have to thank me. As soon as he stood up, glaring at me, Kakashi's cry was heard. Time's up. Naruto has won. Well, that's good, I said calmly and went up to Seiji. Now, my dear brother, you'll stop picking on me. In general, I'd like to never see you again, but, unfortunately, we live in the same house, so this wish of mine is impossible to fulfill. Well, I'm off to train. Kakashi-sensei, thank you for the explanations and judging, you've helped me a lot. Bye everyone. I waved my hand and turned around, getting ready to leave. But before I could take a couple of steps, I dodged a blow to the head, and instantly pulled out the kunai I'd recently bought, turned around and brought it to Seiji's throat. Ouch, didn't your mother teach you that attacking from behind is bad? Besides, you broke the word you gave just a few seconds ago that you would not touch me anymore. You have never fallen so low in my eyes, Seiji. I put the kunai away and turned around and walked towards the exit of the training ground. Next time, you won't get off with a fright, I said without turning around and left the clearing. Returning to my training ground, I continued training with leaves. By the end of the day, I was able to crumple 2 leaves. I think I will slightly exceed Kakashi's task and will not come until I can crush at least 8 leaves at once. After all, there is no such thing as too little control, especially when you are dealing with lightning. But you shouldn't forget about the wind, as well as the other elements. Now I will focus on these 2 and water will be next. It combines too well with lightning. I already have several ideas for joint techniques. Okay, enough planning ahead, I need to master these 2 first. When I got home, I found Kushina and Kiyomi doing fuin. I was about to pass by when the red-haired girl called out to me. Naruto. I looked at her silently, as if asking what she wanted from me. Do you want to join us? I looked at her in surprise, thought for a bit, and nodded. Okay, but first I'll go take a shower. I'll be right back. She smiled and nodded. Quickly going upstairs and taking clean clothes, I headed to the bathroom. I wonder what came over her. I've noticed for quite some time now that she's started paying attention to me and caring a little. Has her conscience really awakened? She'll probably try to improve our relationship. But I'm not sure if I want that. On the one hand, she acted simply disgustingly, forgetting about the existence of her son. Even if it wasn't me, I still feel offended. But on the other hand, she is still my mother. And the orphan's main dream has always been parental love. Complicated. Okay, it's better not to bother my head with this now. Coming out of the bathroom, I went downstairs, smiled at Kiyomi, and sat down next to her. She smiled back and continued drawing symbols. Kushina was about to say something, when I said coldly, anticipating your question, I'll tell you right away that I have mastered everything you taught Kiyomi, so just tell me what I need to do. She drooped a little, but still said, Okay, that's even better, you won't lag behind your sister. Now try to draw a simple paralysis seal, here's the diagram. I nodded and got to work, which, despite the name, turned out to be surprisingly difficult. An hour later we finished and Kushina checked the accuracy. Well done, these are fully working seals. Okay, now everyone to the kitchen, we'll have dinner. We got up from the table and sat down at another one, this time for lunch. For dinner we had rice with meat and vegetables. As soon as we started eating, Seiji returned and, throwing a fierce look at me, to which I only smirked, went upstairs. Kiyomi looked at me questioningly, and in response I silently whispered, later. She nodded and continued eating. After dinner, my sister and I went up to my room, and she immediately asked, What happened between you and Seiji? I smiled and retold her the events of the training with Kakashi, as well as our brotherly game. During the description of the training, she listened attentively, but when I got to our argument, she could not hold back her laughter. I was just glad that I had such a wonderful sister. Finally, saying goodbye and making me promise to teach lightning, she left the room. I fell on the bed and began to think about the events of today. Everything turned out well with Seiji, now he will leave me alone for a while. I'm sure he'll soon go away and start to irritate me again, but I hope he'll get his head together someday. So, dreaming of the impossible and unattainable, I fell asleep. Chapter 5. The next few days I trained lightning control and great impulse, and also learned fuin from Kushina. It turned out to be a very useful lesson. I can already draw a simple paralysis seal without a diagram. Kiyomi has not started training lightning yet. She spends all her time on wind and fuin, in which she is making great progress. Today I finally managed to compress 8 leaves at once. So now I am heading to the 7th training ground for further instructions. There were still 4 people there. I went up and greeted everyone. Kakashi smiled his signature smile, Seiji grimaced and turned away, the rest nodded and continued doing their own thing. By the way, this time they were already practicing walking on water, so all 3 were wet and unhappy. Yo Naruto-kun, so, were you able to squeeze 5 leaves? I put 8 leaves on my palm and covered them with my other palm, squeezed. Removing my palm, I showed the result. Kakashi chuckled approvingly. For some reason, I thought that you would overdo the job. Well, nevertheless, the condition is met, so I will teach you the ball lightning technique. It creates several small balls of lightning around you, which will fly to the enemy if he comes close, or where you direct them yourself. The seals are like this. He folded several seals, and 7 small ball lightning appeared around him, which he directed to the nearest tree. This is not exactly an offensive technique, it is more designed for support, since it causes little damage, unless of course you feed it with a lot of chakra. Kakashi continued to explain. Let me repeat it again, and you carefully watch the seals and how the chakra is directed. He repeated the technique once more and said, Train, if you have any questions, don't be shy, ask, and I'll go watch mine. Good luck. He finished, turned around and headed towards the lake, where his students were amusingly falling into the water. I'm 100% sure that this gives him sincere pleasure. And you're absolutely right, said my furry friend. Sometimes I forget that he can read people's emotions. Okay, stop thinking about unnecessary things, it's time to train the technique. Having folded the necessary seals, I said. Right on, ball lightning. A very small ball appeared next to me, which almost immediately went out. Yeah, I have a lot of work to do. A few hours later, I stood there completely exhausted, but satisfied, because I increased the number of balls to 3 stable ones. Sometimes Seiji glanced at me, in his eyes in addition to anger, envy flashed. Apparently, he does not yet have mastered elemental transformations. Having decided that I had enough training for today, I said goodbye to everyone and went home. There, the usual seal training began. Kushina definitely wants us to communicate normally, but I still can't understand how I feel about her. I really want to have a normal, loving family, but I can't forgive her yet. I don't know, maybe in the future I will be able to, but definitely not in the near future. But I began to communicate with her less coldly, which makes her very happy. And I-san. Kiyomi distracted me from my thoughts. Huh? Did you want something, Emoto? I woke up. Finally woke up, I'd been calling you for a minute. Do you remember that we have training with Satsuki tomorrow? Indeed. Thank you for reminding me. Without you I would have forgotten. I smiled at her. You're welcome. She smiled back. After talking a little more, we went to our rooms. Already lying in bed, I thought about tomorrow. I was wondering how things would go with Satsuki. Stop thinking so loudly, you're keeping me awake. Kurama growled. Smiling, I listened to his advice and soon fell asleep. Waking up the next day, I did my usual stretching and went to the shower. Coming out of the bathroom, I went downstairs and started making breakfast for 2 people. Just when I finished setting the table, Kiyomi came. She smiled and sat down at the table. While chatting about nothing, we quickly had breakfast and went to the academy, where they agreed to meet. When we got to the right place, she was already there. Hello Kiyomi, Naruto. Hello Satsuki, we said in unison, looked at each other and laughed. She only chuckled at this. Having calmed down, we nevertheless continued the conversation. Well, are we going to the training ground? I asked. Yeah. We headed to our training ground with Kiyomi. Once there, we began to warm up. I suggest physical exercises first, said Uchiha. Okay. We worked out for 2 hours and did not have time to get very tired, but Satsuki was still exhausted. The lack of Uzumaki genes is telling. Kiyomi and I turned out to be much more resilient. Naruto, I remember you said that Kakashi-san started training you right on. Can you explain how to control it? I also have an affinity with it? Asked Satsuki. Yes, and me too, exclaimed Kiyomi. Yes, of course. I simply answered and began to explain. It is even useful when you explain the material to someone. Then you yourself begin to understand it better. So they began to train control over Right-on, and I continued training ball lightning. After 2 hours, my chakra ran out, and Satsuki was able to compress a leaf. Kiyomi hadn't succeeded yet, but she didn't give up and kept trying. We were all hungry and decided to go get a bite to eat, and at the same time replenish our chakra during the rest. When she returned, Satsuki offered me another sparring match, but without any restrictions. I agreed, and we stood on opposite sides of the clearing. Kiyomi threw a kunai high into the air, and as soon as it stuck in the ground, we rushed at each other. This time, I decided to keep her under constant pressure, not giving her time to counterattack and forcing her to retreat. My idea worked, and we went out to the lake. Satsuki knew how to walk on water, so the fight continued on the water. Realizing that I was superior to her in Tai, she increased the distance between us and began throwing kunai at me. I began to fight back and dodge. After all, Bukijutsu had never been my strong point. I always relied on Sasuke in this. He was definitely a master in it. Deciding that it was time to end this fight, I jumped high into the air and folded the seals. Futon, great impulse. Satsuki managed to get out of the technique's range, but I was aiming not at her, but at the water beneath her. A huge pile of splashes rose up, blocking her view. Taking advantage of this, I shouted, Right-on, ball lightning! Several balls appeared around me and rushed towards the splashes. All the water became electrified, and since the Uchiha was standing in the epicenter of this water madness, she also got it. But I didn't take into account that due to the pain, she could lose control of her chakra and fall into the water. Now it was difficult for her to control her body, so I had to dive after her so that she wouldn't drown. Having emerged with her, I picked her up in my arms and, smirking, said, It seems that I won again. Yes, well done. Now be so kind as to put me down, please. She answered irritably. Coming ashore, I put her down on the ground. Kiyomi immediately ran up to us. Anai-san, that was a great idea. Satsuki, are you okay? Uchiha grumbled, but it could have been easier. Okay, next time I'll be more gentle, I smiled. Idiot. She said sharply and turned to Kiyomi. But I managed to see a small blush on her cheeks. At that moment, another person landed on the training ground, whom I immediately recognized. Tall, dark hair down to his shoulder blades, tied in a ponytail, and 2 strands on the sides. Black eyes and a hitai on his forehead. Anai-san? What are you doing here? Satsuki was surprised. Yes, it was Uchiha. Itachi himself. I was just wondering where you were. I can't remember a day when you didn't ask me to train when I was at home. And it turns out you're here training with your friends. He smiled. But where are my manners? Allow me to introduce myself, Uchiha Itachi, this evil guy's older brother. Namake's Kiyomi Uzumaki Naruto. We introduced ourselves in response. He was surprised by my last name, but did not ask anything. I did not know that you would miss my pestering. Satsuki grinned. But if you want it so much, then could you train us? I shouldn't have said that, Itachi sighed. The 3 of us laughed. Okay, so be it, I will train you. He grinned somehow unkindly. He drove us so hard that now we are lying on the grass, unable to move. And he stands and grins even more. Satsuki, are you satisfied with the training? He asked innocently. In response, she mumbled something unintelligible. He chuckled and created 2 shadow clones. Each picked up a body and carried it home. When we separated, we languidly waved our hands, saying goodbye to Satsuki. she responded in kind. He carried us home and knocked on the door. Kushina opened it and was surprised. Itachi-kun? What are you doing here? She asked. And when she saw his cargo, she was even more surprised. What happened? Training, he chuckled. And I see, you were the one who drove them so hard? Yes, he answered in the same monosyllables. Got it. Thank you, Itachi-kun. Say hello to Miko-chan, she said, accepting us. Sometimes I forget that she is also a shinobi and can hold us calmly. Certainly. Goodbye, Kushina-san. As I understand it, no fuin today, she said. So let's wake up, run to the shower and to the table. We found the strength in ourselves and trudged to the bathroom. It's good that there were several of them, and we wouldn't have to wait for one to finish. Having eaten quickly, we went to our rooms. I collapsed on the bed, exhausted, and passed out without undressing. Chapter 6. Kiyomi and I continued to study fuin, and Satsuki often joined us for the rest of our training. We hoped to be assigned to the same team, and each of us focused on our own areas of training. Kiyomi wind and fuin, Satsuki fire, genjutsu and bukijutsu, and I lightning, water and kenjutsu. Yes, I began to learn how to use weapons and was making quite good progress in them. Itachi trained us when he could, and gave me the basics of Tanto. Kakashi helped me master lightning. We all advanced quite a lot in our chosen areas of the shinobi art, but did not forget about other skills. However, today something was wrong. It seemed like a normal routine, but I could not shake the feeling of impending trouble. In my world, as far as I remember, the Uchiha clan massacre happened around this time, but here Minato and Fugaku are friends and the red-eyed clan does not discredit. And Shursui is still alive, he also sometimes joins our training with Itachi. Despite this, I decided to be on guard. I am used to trusting my intuition. That is why I called Satsuki to another training session today and offered another sparring match. If the massacre does happen, I want her to have as many chances as possible to survive. After all, this is a different world, and here everything can happen differently. Having habitually thrown the kunai up, we waited for it to stick into the ground. We rushed at each other. I took out a tanto on the run, and she took out a kunai. I made a trial strike with my sword in the stomach, which she deflected to the side and struck a blow to the head, from which I ducked and made a sweep. She jumped back and threw several kunai at me, which I blocked and rushed after her. Having quickly caught up with her, I continued to press her, but she successfully fought off everything. At some point, I went for a trick and decided to show her something new. I struck with my sword from the right, which she blocked, but before she could react, I took out a kunai from the body seal in my other hand and slashed her thigh. She winced and jumped back again. Throwing several shurikens, she said, "Katan, phoenix flowers." The shurikens became covered in flames and flew in my direction. I also jumped back and responded with my technique. Suetun, water core. A large ball of water knocked down the shurikens, extinguished the flames and continued flying in her direction. Katan, large fireball. The fireball crashed into the water one, forming a large cloud of steam. I saw a good opportunity to test a new technique and took advantage of it. Raitun, thundercloud. Furtun, great gust. The entire cloud became electrified and flew towards Satsuki under the influence of the wind. She quickly jumped onto a tree, avoiding this technique, and threw several kunai with a fishing line stretching from them at me. She managed to catch me and tie me to the tree and made a new series of seals. Katan, dragon's breath. Flames rushed along the fishing line towards me. I left as a substitute and sighed heavily. There wasn't much chakra left, despite my reserve. After all, I had used quite expensive techniques. I think her situation is no better. She used fewer techniques, but her reserve is also much smaller than mine. It's time to end this fight. I created 2 shadow clones, one of which ran lightning chakra along the sword. The 3 of us ran towards her, with the clone with the electric sword running in front, and me slightly behind on the right. She noticed us and started throwing iron at us. The left clone dissipated, and I picked up the remaining one, spun it around and threw it at her. She was surprised, but was able to dodge it and responded with a kick. It dissipated, and the smoke from the fog hid my approach. I ran up and kicked her in the body with all my might, hoping for victory. However, Satsuki dissipated with a painfully familiar pop, and several ball lightnings flew at me. Before I could regain control of my body, the real Uchiha ran up and brought a kunai to her throat. "I think I won," she said with a satisfied smile. "Congratulations," I said sincerely. She put the kunai away and offered me her hand. Taking it and standing up, we silently walked towards the lake, which had already become an unofficial place for rest. I collapsed next to the shore, leaning my back against a tree. My body was still not completely obedient after the electric shock. She sat down tiredly next to me. "A good fight," she said. "When did you learn to make body seals?" "I applied them a couple of days ago, and I've been studying the theory for the last month." "And when did you master shadow clones? And who taught you?" "Although no, you don't have to answer the last question, obviously Itachi-san." I smiled. "Yes, and he asked me to call him just Itachi, without any suffixes." So, discussing the past fight and just chatting, we sat by the lake and relaxed. After 2 hours, when the sun had already set, we realized that we had been sitting too long, and it was time to wrap up. Having reached the fork where we usually split up, Satsuki asked, "Do you want to come over? Mom invited you today." Why not? The later I get home, the better." She nodded understandingly and smiled. Satsuki was aware of my problems with my family, and was amazed by the Hokage's attitude towards her son. She wanted to tell her parents, who were friends with Minato and Kushina, and I had a lot of trouble talking her out of it. We headed to the Uchiha quarter together. They knew me there. I had visited Satsuki more than once. Mikoto-san turned out to be a wonderful woman who truly loved her children. She also treated me with warmth. After all, I was her friend's son and her daughter's friend. And Fugaku-san turned out to be exactly how I imagined him, an Uchiha to the core, who would keep a brick face in any situation. Even at home, he allowed himself only a stingy smile, which in his understanding was simply an enormous amount of emotion. Approaching the quarter, I realized that my worst expectations had come true. There was no light in the entire quarter, but the dull sounds of battle could be heard from afar. Satsuki turned pale and, forgetting about everything, ran deeper into the quarter. I cursed through my teeth, threw a kunai with an explosive tag high into the air to attract the attention of the shinobi and the Hokage, and rushed after her. Having run to the house of the clan head, we saw the corpses of Satsuki's parents and a still living Itachi, fighting off 2 unknown people. More precisely, 1 unknown and 1 all too familiar to me. Obito Uchiha, although he was now wearing a different mask, but it was simply impossible not to recognize his fighting style with passing through attacks. The second was a tall man in a black cloak with a hood covering his face. All that was visible under it was a burning Mangekyo Sharingan in the form of a large black circle and 3 small angles extending from it. This drawing was unfamiliar to me. It did not exist in my world, so it was someone new. He controlled some blades from a distance, directing them at Itachi. At this time, he was defending himself with Susanu's ribs. Obviously, from the sight of his dead parents, he was able to awaken his Mangekyo. Satsuki looked at the picture in shock. Her eyes were wide open, the Sharingan with 1 tomo was burning brightly in them, tears were gathering in the corners. The stranger saw her, grinned and directed a large number of knives at her. I cursed again and tried to pull her out from under this attack. I made it, but my back was badly cut. He did not calm down and sent a new wave of blades at us. Suetun, water core. I formed seals and spat out a large ball of water at the blades, knocking them out of the way and protecting Satsuki. I hoped that I could hold out for at least a little while until the Hokage arrived, and I prayed to all the gods that Itachi would also be able to withstand Obito's onslaught. The stranger frowned and formed seals. Futon, vacuum blades. Another wave of knives flew at us, but now they were covered in wind chakra. Now it was really dangerous. I shouted behind me. Satsuki, this is not the time to grieve. I need your help. We can still survive. A sob was heard from behind, but she still formed seals and screamed hysterically. Katan, great fireball. A ball of enormous size flew towards the blades. I blew the ball up even more with my great impulse, and then managed to fold another series of seals. Fuinpo, protective dome. A green dome appeared around us. It is certainly not very strong, but it can withstand several techniques. The fireball was able to knock down most of the blades, the barrier took the rest. But one knife still pierced it and stuck into my shoulder. I groaned, but did not rush to pull it out so as not to bleed to death. More knives flew at us, and this time we will not be able to block them. There is only one solution. I sighed and reached for my chakra biju. Red chakra began to boil around me, 2 tails formed, my maximum at the moment. I released a powerful wave of chakra, throwing away all the knives flying at us. I will last a maximum of a minute in this mode. Where is this Minato when he is so needed? As if hearing my thoughts, a 3-pronged one stuck next to me kunai, and a moment later the 4th appeared. He looked at me worriedly and moved towards me, but I growled. I'm in control, help Itachi. He nodded and rushed to the Uchihas. Kakashi landed next to me and took on the unknown man in the cloak. I breathed a sigh of relief, turned around and saw a tearful Satsuki. I smiled weakly at her and fell, losing consciousness. I woke up, still lying on the ground, which surprised me. Apparently, I hadn't been unconscious for long. Someone was shaking me violently and calling my name. Somehow opening my eyes, I saw Satsuki, in whose eyes 2 tomo were already burning. Poor girl, so many shocks in one evening. Satsuki, stop shaking me, I'm fine. I said quietly and rose with difficulty. She sighed with relief and immediately threw herself on my neck, bursting into tears. I was a little taken aback by this, but hugged her back, whispering something soothing. Looking around, I realized that I was not where I fell. Apparently Satsuki carried me out of the fight. The adults found us in this position. Minato looked whole, but tired. Kakashi was a little battered, but also everything was within normal limits. The same cannot be said about Itachi. He could barely stand on his feet, supported by Kakashi, all wounded, but alive. Satsuki saw her brother and rushed to him, but I stopped her. If you jump on him now, you can only make it worse, I said quietly. And already louder addressed Minato. Hokage-sama, maybe you can use Hiraishin and transfer us all to the hospital? Satsuki calmed down a little, and Minato quickly approached Itachi and Kakashi, touched their shoulders and moved. A minute later he returned, took us by the shoulders and also carried us to the hospital. The medics immediately took care of us. They put me on a gurney and took me somewhere. Realizing that all this time I was holding on solely by stubbornness, and that it was all over, I allowed my consciousness to switch off. Chapter 7. I woke up lying in an unfamiliar room. For a second I didn't understand what was happening, but remembering the events of the previous night, I was confused. I hoped that if Minato was alive, there would be no massacre. And I was wrong. Now my score with Obito has grown even more. But who was the second? In my world, he didn't exist and I am very nervous about him having a Mangekyo. If there are 2 like Obito, then we have big problems. Okay, it doesn't concern me much now, but the difficulty and frequency of training need to be increased. I need to be stronger. Having come to my senses a little and looking around more carefully, I realized that I was not alone in the room. Kiyomi was sitting on a chair next to me and sleeping, leaning against my bed. I looked out the window and realized that it was morning. Apparently, she sat here all night and fell asleep. I remembered all my solitary awakenings in similar rooms in my world after yet another beating. I remembered the feeling of loneliness that filled my entire childhood. And now, seeing that someone was worried about me, that someone cared about me, I couldn't stand it, and tears came to my eyes. After all, even when I was a genin, most people didn't care about me. Quickly wiping my eyes, I smiled and sat up more comfortably. Kiyomi woke up from my fussing. For a few moments she didn't understand where she was. But when her eyes became meaningful, she looked at me, smiled and threw herself on my neck with a scream. And I hugged her too and felt my shoulder getting wet. She was crying. "Oh, what's wrong? I'm fine. I'm sure I'll be back to normal soon." I tried to calm her down. "I'm sorry, I was just scared. You were unconscious for 3 days, and despite the assurances of the Iranians, I managed to come up with a lot of bad things," she said without taking her eyes off me. "I slept well. Apparently, it's too early for me to use two tails." We lay like that for about another minute, and she pulled away. "How's Satsuki?" I asked. She slapped herself on the forehead and said I promised to call her when you wake up. Ran out of the room. I just started waiting, wondering what state my friend was in. After all, she had lost her parents and almost lost her brother. In addition, she awakened the Sharingan and almost immediately strengthened it with a second tomo, which is probably a difficult test for a child's body. My thoughts were interrupted by the slam of the door, and they pounced on me again. Apparently, they decided to hug me today. To complete the set, it remained for Kushina to run with her hugs. Having driven these thoughts aside, I tried to calm the Uchiha. When she came to her senses a little, she finally pulled away. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for saving me." "That's what friends are for," I smiled at her. She smiled timidly in response. "How are you?" "Terrible," she admitted. "My body is fine, but—" she faltered. "You don't have to continue," I said. "I understand that it's very difficult for you to accept all of this." Our conversation was interrupted by another slam of the door. Minato was standing in the doorway. He smiled at the girls. "Hello, could you please go outside? I need to have a serious talk with my son." They nodded and left silently. He sat down on the chair where Kiyomi had been sitting a minute earlier and looked at me seriously. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Not bad," I answered coldly. "Why did you go there? You could have died." He raised his voice a little. "Because Satsuki is my friend and I couldn't abandon her. Besides, I gave you a sign that something was going on. I have a counter question for you, Hokage-sama." He flinched a little from such an address. "Are you worried now because I am your son, or because I am a Jinchuriki?" I asked in the same cold tone. He lowered his head and said nothing. A minute later he spoke up. "For a long time?" he asked monosyllabically. "For years," I answered monosyllabically, perfectly understanding what he was asking, but at the same time lying a little. We had long ago discussed what we would say in such a case. He only nodded. "I need to check your seal. Under such influence of the fox's chakra it could have been damaged." "That is not necessary." "How do you know?" "I have to check." Minato was surprised. "That is not necessary," I said much more firmly. "How can you control the fox?" "I know that without its direct control, you would not have been able to withstand so much of its chakra at such an age. And now you still refuse to show the seal. What are you hiding from me?" I sighed. All hopes that this would remain a secret were destroyed. I have been in contact with the fox for a long time. I will even say more, we were able to become friends, not right away of course, but we were able to. I did not want to show you the seal, because it has been open for 2 years. He stared at me in surprise. "When did you start communicating with him?" "When I was 5. "Why didn't you tell us?" "It was dangerous. He could take control of you." "I have to close the seal." He flared up and reached for my stomach. I intercepted his hand. "Just try to deprive me of a friend. Believe me, you will not like the consequences. We were able to open the seal once, we can do it again. I can control his chakra, and with this I suggest we end this conversation and never return to it," I said firmly, looking straight into his eyes. Minato looked at me stunned. He could not believe that his son was opposing him and looking at him as an enemy. However, he remembered how everyone except his sister treated him, and realized that he did not deserve any different treatment. He nodded resignedly and removed his hand. "Okay, I'll trust you." I nodded with satisfaction and decided to ask him about the results of the massacre. How many Uchiha survived? 17 people out of more than 100. Itachi will become the head of the clan as soon as he recovers from the battle. He decided to answer extremely honestly, without hiding anything. How is he? After the massacre, he was in a deplorable state, but now he is actively recovering. How much longer will I lie here? You will be discharged this evening. What happened to the attackers? They disappeared. I recognized one of them. It was because of him that the Nine Tails broke out 9 years ago. Which one? The one Itachi fought. With his help, they got out of Konoha. He owns some kind of spatial technique. Can I go to Itachi? Not yet, they're not letting anyone see him. Where are the other Uchihas now? Almost all of the survivors are wounded. Apparently the killers tried to do everything as quickly as possible and didn't keep an eye on them. That's why they're all here in the hospital. I see. I sighed. Is there anything else you want to talk about? No. I'll go. Get well soon. He answered and left the room. The girls returned right after he left. What were you talking about? Kiyomi asked right away. About Kurama. I told her a long time ago that I'm friends with the fox. About who? Satsuki didn't understand. But I didn't tell her. Kurama, can I tell you about you? I asked mentally. Go ahead. He sighed. You'll tell me sooner or later anyway, so why drag it out? About the nine-tailed fox. I grinned. What? Uchiha didn't understand. Kurama is the name of the nine-tailed fox. We've been friends since we were 5. It was his chakra that enveloped me yesterday when I was fighting off the last wave of knives. Minato wanted to know how I controlled him. He had no idea that it was possible to cooperate with him. You certainly have friends. She was surprised. Are you sure you can trust him? Yes, I said firmly. Okay, she nodded, then I don't have to worry about it. Will you be released soon? Tonight. Okay, then tomorrow for training? I just nodded. You lie down and get better, and I'm going to Itachi. Bye. She said goodbye and left. I frowned. She looks too calm. What happened after I passed out? I found out about everything only the next day and immediately ran here. Satsuki was in a terrible state. She was still somehow holding on, but when she saw me, she couldn't take it anymore and started having hysterics. It took me several hours to calm her down. Almost all of the surviving Uchihas didn't know her. The only people close to her were Itachi and Shui, who was not in the village at the time, as well as you and me. You were unconscious, so only I was able to calm her down. After crying, she fell asleep. And when she woke up, she said that she had to become stronger and avenge her family, but she wouldn't do anything without Itachi. Well, I expected something like that. She wants to forget herself in training now and will most likely close herself off. She needs our support now. Maybe I should offer her to stay with us until Itachi recovers? I don't think it would be good for her to live alone in the house where her dead parents lay. I reasoned. Good idea! We just need to ask the parents. Kiyomi immediately caught fire with this idea. Yes, can you go ask now? The sooner we resolve this issue, the better. Yes, of course. And could you stay with Satsuki? I think it would be better for her not to be alone right now. I didn't have to ask, I was going to go to her now anyway. I just hope that I don't run into any medics on the way and they won't chase me back to the ward. After these words I got out of bed and Kiyomi, chuckling, left the room. As soon as I went out the door I realized that I had no idea where Itachi's room was. Thinking that he might be in the seriously wounded ward, I went there out of habit. And I was right. Satsuki was sitting in front of one of the rooms. I silently sat down next to her. She also silently looked at me and nodded gratefully. She is not a stupid girl, she understood why I was here and not at home. We sat for quite a long time, without saying a word, until she fell asleep, burying her head in my shoulder. I just chuckled at this. Kiyomi found us in this position. She smiled widely, seeing such a picture. Father allowed Satsuki to stay with us. And you were also discharged, so we can go home, she said quietly. It's strange, I expected that she would immediately start teasing me. Will she really not? By the way, you look good. Well, yes, how could I doubt my sister so much? Good. Only it looks like I'll have to carry her. That way you'll look even better. She grinned. I sighed, but smiled and picked up Uchiha. She turned out to be light, so even after chakra exhaustion I could carry her home. Quietly, so as not to wake Satsuki, joking with each other, we left the hospital. Kushina met us at the threshold of the house, surprised by my burden. While Kiyomi explained the situation to her mother, I went up to the second floor and put the girl on the bed in her sister's room. Quietly closing the door, I went downstairs. Kushina immediately came up to me and hugged me tightly. Well, now the set is complete, I grinned to myself, but this time I didn't return the hug. She pulled away and demanded a retelling of what happened, while she herself was preparing dinner at that time. I quickly told her everything, ate and went to my room. A couple of minutes later, Kiyomi came to see me. You're certainly a good boy, you put Satsuki on my bed, but where should I sleep? She said jokingly. So that means you found yourself a girl, and now you can forget about your sister? She once rested her head on my shoulder, and now you're going to remind me of that for the rest of my life? Of course, how could it be otherwise? She smiled broadly. Well, yes, indeed, how could I doubt you? I grinned. You can sleep at my place tonight, I'll sleep on the couch. Really? She feigned surprise. Just don't make a surprise face, you came here counting on this outcome. Well, there you go, you figured me out now, she feigned pout. We looked at each other and, unable to contain ourselves, burst out laughing. Thank you, and I-san. Then the door opened, and we saw Satsuki looking lost. She also stared at us and asked, Where am I? What am I doing here? You're at our home, and for now you're living here. Kiyomi exclaimed before me. She opened her eyes in surprise and looked at me, asking for clarification. Kiyomi and I decided that it would be better for you to live with us until Itachi recovers. We came to an agreement with your father, and you were allowed to stay until your brother returns to duty. I answered more fully. Don't play poor, it was entirely your idea, I just supported it. My sister said, to which I only rolled my eyes. Satsuki looked at us incredulously. Tears welled up in her eyes, she came up and hugged us both. Thank you, she said in a strangled voice, for being there. We smiled and hugged her too. After standing like that for a minute, Satsuki finally pulled away. Where will I sleep? Kiyomi's eyes gleamed unkindly. I have a feeling I won't like what she's about to say. Well, before you came, Anai-san gave me the bed in his room and I was thinking of sleeping here while you were comfortably settled in mine. But you woke up very well, and I can go back to my room. You can settle in here. Anai-san, you won't refuse her, will you? I was right once again, I didn't like it. Kurama laughed at his entire subconscious, saying that a 9-year-old girl had outplayed me. You know that I can't refuse you when you look at me like that and take advantage of it, I said. Stay, Satsuki, I won't mind. They laughed, and Satsuki thanked me with another hug. Somehow there are too many of them in my life lately. Why does something terrible have to happen for that to happen? Having said goodbye to the girls, I went to the bathroom. After taking a shower, I went down to the living room, lay down on the couch and quickly fell asleep. Chapter 8. Kushina found me doing this. Good morning, Naruto. I nodded silently without turning around. Can we talk? She asked. I turned to her, letting her know that she could talk. Naruto, I understand that we caused you a lot of pain, and that this cannot be forgiven. I will understand if you continue to ignore me, although it hurts me to realize this. But I still want to ask you, will you give me a chance to improve? Will you ever be able to forgive me? I sighed silently. Why did she decide to talk about this now? I myself am now hard from the realization that I could not prevent the Uchiha massacre, plus I need to support Satsuki with all my might so that she does not plunge into darkness like Sasuke. Besides, it is early morning, and I myself am still not fully awake. But I still need to answer. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive you. I'm not sure if I want to forgive you at all. Maybe one day we'll be able to mend our relationship, but you can't count on complete forgiveness. We'll never be a happy family again. But I can give you a chance. Just like I can give it to Seiji, because it's not his fault that he became such an idiot. That's your fault, his parents, who couldn't raise him properly. He might still come to his senses. But Minato doesn't have that chance. I'll never forgive him, I answered coldly. Tears welled up in Kushina's eyes. She really understood that she didn't deserve his forgiveness, but she was very glad that I gave her and Seiji a chance. She quietly said, "Thank you," and left the kitchen, shedding tears. To be honest, I was also overcome with emotions. For myself, I still decided that my parents are those who sacrificed their lives so that I could survive. Even though I had only a short conversation with them, I sincerely love and respect them. The local parents are strangers to me, who treated their child cruelly. I will never accept them, but still, Kushina can count on an even relationship. I thought a lot about Seiji, too. Lately, he has also begun to treat me better. I don't know the exact reason, but I hope that he is starting to think for himself and stop repeating what his parents and the villagers do. If so, then I am only happy for him and will hope that he will still become my brother, because, as I told Kushina, it is not his fault that he is like this. Remember the sun, here is a ray, I said to myself when I saw Seiji entering the kitchen. He nodded in greeting and, seeing 3 portions, asked, "Who is the third one for?" He did not think for a second that it was intended for him. "Satsuki," I answered monosyllabically. "What is she doing here?" He was surprised. "He's alive. Until Itachi recovers." Kiyomi and I decided that she shouldn't return to her home yet, especially alone, and we made an agreement with her father. "Got it. Listen, Naruto, could you help me? It's my turn to be surprised. What did he just say? Did I hear him right?" Unexpectedly I said, "So you'd ask for help. I understand that I wasn't the best person towards you before, that's putting it mildly," I chuckled, interrupting him. "Yes, but now I'm trying to change." "And what made you come to your senses?" I asked. I was genuinely interested. "The last mission," he said quietly, "and the failed Chunin exam." "What happened on the last mission?" "We came across a missing nin. He wasn't very strong, Kakashi-sensei quickly defeated him. But before that, he simply scattered my entire team. I always considered myself untouchable because I am the son of the Hokage, but this meeting destroyed my beliefs. And I realized that I am weak. I could not oppose him in any way. He simply did not notice me. And you were able to resist the missing nin who attacked the Uchiha." "Yes, for a short time, but you were able to, when I could not cope with an opponent weaker. And I ask you for help. Let me train with you and Kiyomi. I feel terrible because I asked my younger brother, whom I have always despised, to help me become stronger, but I have no one else to turn to. Kakashi-sensei, of course, teaches us and tries his best to hammer knowledge and skills into our heads. But now he will have little time for our training, because of the massacre. Konoha has weakened and lost a large number of active shinobi, and he will have to leave the village for a long time. So I ask you, please help me." He quietly finished his heartfelt speech. His speech surprised me and touched something in my soul. Now he reminded me of myself when I asked Jiraiya to train me before the Chunin exam. His words showed that he had finally come to his senses. The only thing that confuses me is that there was a minute gap between Kushina and Seiji's requests. Apparently, he overheard us, heard that I was ready to give him a chance, and plucked up the courage to ask for help. To be honest, I was even a little impressed. It is hard to admit your mistakes and ask for forgiveness. Apparently, I thought for too long, and he had already decided that I would refuse. He was all wilted, drooping his shoulders and heading for the exit of the room when he heard my voice. "Do you understand that you will have to work hard? That you will almost die during training?" I said to his back. He looked at me incredulously. A few seconds later, he came to his senses, smiled and said, "Yes, I understand and am ready for this." "Looking into my eyes, he said firmly, "Then let's start today." And may Rakuto help you if you shirk. Thank you, brother, I won't forget this and won't let you down, Seiji exclaimed happily. I nodded to him and turned back to breakfast, which, due to all this talking, had managed to get badly burnt. Oh no, I cursed under my breath, throwing out the coals and putting the food out again, but this time for 4. Seiji only smiled happily at this. When the girls entered the kitchen, they couldn't believe their eyes. After all, I was talking quite peacefully, and even cheerfully, with Seiji, whom I had always hated. There were 2 more portions of food on the table. Having recovered from the shock, they sat down at the table and greeted each other. What happened between you two? Kiyomi immediately asked. In short, we made up, and now he will join us for training, I answered. The answer clearly did not satisfy them, and they demanded details. Having heard the whole story, Kiyomi happily hugged Seiji, which surprised him, but he hugged her back with a joyful smile. Satsuki looked at this picture. So now the academy student will train a genin, who graduated from this academy 2 years ago, she said with a sly smile. Seiji blushed and hid his face in his sister's hair, to which she laughed. We picked up her laughter and could not calm down for a few more minutes. Finally, having laughed enough and finished breakfast, the 4 of us left the house and headed to the training ground. There I began to question. What are your elements? I asked first. Earth and water. I see. I can't help you with earth, but we will work with water. And what are your elements? He inquired. All except earth. I grinned. His eyes widened. Wow. Okay, now one of the main questions, I interrupted him. Do you master the shadow cloning technique? No. Do you master it? It's forbidden. He continued to be surprised. It's forbidden because many lack the reserves to use it effectively. We are half Uzumaki, so we have no problems with the reserves. So, now we start with physical exercises, then I will teach you clones and explain why it is so important. After that, we will train water and body. Got it. Then let's begin. After 4 hours of hard training, we were all exhausted. I took the food I had bought in advance from the seal, and we ate right there. After a little rest, I began teaching Seiji clones, while sending a couple dozen to practice techniques and improve control. So we trained until the evening. Satsuki and Kiyomi were sparring and practicing their techniques at this time. Seiji hadn't mastered the clones yet, but I didn't think it would take him long. After training, we split up. Seiji went home to rest, and the 3 of us went to the hospital to visit Itachi. This time, visitors were allowed in, and Satsuki was the first to go in. Kiyomi and I decided to give them some time alone. Are you glad that Seiji made peace with us? I asked her. After all, she didn't really love me that much. Of course I'm glad about that, Kiyomi answered immediately. I'm glad that he came to his senses. But how do you feel about it? After all, it was you who suffered most from him. I don't know, I admitted. On the one hand, I'm glad that he pulled himself together and asked for help. On the other hand, it's hard to forget how he treated me and how much I suffered from him. But he can still be understood and forgiven, I just need time to come to terms with it. Everything will be fine. She supported me. I smiled gratefully at her and said nothing. A minute later, a tearful Satsuki came out and invited us in. Kiyomi comfortingly hugged her shoulders, and we entered the ward. Itachi looked much better than after the massacre, but still looked exhausted. However, despite his appearance, he smiled when he saw us. Hello Naruto, Kiyomi. First of all, I want to thank you. Naruto, you saved my sister, my gratitude to you is invaluable. Just as she told me, you sheltered her. All I can say is that I am incredibly glad that Satsuki has such friends. You will always be friends of the clan and my friends. If you need anything, I will do my best to help you. We just did what we had to, and you don't owe us anything, I answered immediately. And yet you can always count on me. As soon as I get better, we will continue training. As the head of the clan, I will rarely leave the village from now on. Thank you, Itachi-san. Kiyomi and I answered in unison. How many times have I told you to remove all these suffixes? He feigned indignation. I'm not that old. Good, Itachi-sensei? I grinned. I don't even know what's worse. He also grinned. Let's just stop at Itachi, okay? Okay. We talked for about 10 more minutes, when we were driven to the exit. We said goodbye and promised to stop by again. After leaving the hospital, we decided to take a walk. After having a bite to eat in Ichiraku, we walked through evening Konoha, chatting about nothing. After 15 minutes, we came out to the Hokage monument. Unfortunately, we had already missed the sunset, but the view of Konoha at night was still amazing. I walked away from the girls a little and jumped on the forest's head. This was my favorite place to think. Ignoring everything, I just sat and looked at the horizon, remembering my past life. This had happened to me a couple of times since I came to this world, and each time at such moments I headed here, to the head of my father, a man whom I respect and love with all my heart. I don't know why I was overcome by such a melancholic mood, but I couldn't cope with it. All the losses I had experienced fell upon me. Niji, Jiraiya, Kakashi-sensei, my parents. Those whom I couldn't save. Even Jiraiya, despite the fact that I can't stand him now, at that time he was almost like a family to me, which was very painful to lose. Now I couldn't save the Uchiha. How many more deaths will there be before everything settles down? And will I ever be able to live a normal life, without adventures, without a hunt declared for me, just live peacefully? My thoughts were interrupted by Kiyomi's arms wrapping around me. I looked at her in surprise. She smiled sadly and asked, "What happened? Why are you crying?" Only now did I realize that tears were flowing from my eyes. I hugged her with one arm and answered, "Nothing, everything is fine, I was just thinking." "We understand that this is not true," said Satsuki, who sat down on the other side of me. "Why don't you want to tell us?" "Someday I will tell you," I promised, "but not now. I'm not ready yet. Forgive me." Kiyomi squeezed me tighter, and Satsuki nodded understandingly. We sat like that until nightfall. We didn't want to talk anymore, and we just silently looked into the distance. I came to my senses when Kiyomi fell asleep. Satsuki chuckled. "Did you two agree on this or something?" I said, picking up my sister. "What are you talking about?" She didn't understand. "I carried you from the hospital the same way yesterday, now I'm carrying Kiyomi," I explained. She blushed a little. "Did you think that you yourself got to our house in your sleep?" I chuckled. "I somehow never thought about how I ended up here," she was embarrassed. "So Kiyomi hasn't teased you yet?" I was surprised she seemed to have relaxed. "I'll tell you more, you fell asleep on my shoulder in the hospital yesterday." "Sorry." She blushed even more. "Oh well, it was even nice," I continued to embarrass her. "So if you feel like sleeping, I'm always at your service." "You're an idiot," she said, but she smiled anyway. That's how we got to the house, where Seiji was waiting for us. He was surprised to see his sister in my arms, but he didn't ask any questions. I carried her into the room and laid her on the bed. I quietly closed the door and went downstairs. "Seiji, can I sleep on the spare futon in your room?" "Satsuki is taking my room," I asked. "Sure, no problem," he answered immediately. "Thank you." After a quick shower, I took the futon and went to Seiji's room. I had never been here before, and it turned out to be an exact copy of mine. I spread the futon on the floor and lay down on it. "Good night, Naruto." "Good night, Seiji."